one survived when Jurak descended. Not cities, not war fleets, not hope. He was the apex predator of the known galaxy, born in firestorms, armored in scale harder than void steel, and feared for a breath that could vaporize starcruisers. His wings, when unfurled, cast shadows over continents, and his voice had once cracked the moonplate of Narkess. The Empire had tried to leash him, to weaponize his wrath, but even their biothrall collar failed, snapping like ribbon when he melted the labs that birthed him. Since that day, Jurak had become a storm without allegiance, a beast without mercy. But power does not protect from pain. After tearing through a Helix armada during his fury flight across the core belt, Jurak had pierced his nose on a harpoon trap laced with necrothorns, alien barbs that burned even his blood. Embedded just inside his nostril, the poisoned thorn drove him mad, disrupting his equilibrium and flooding his senses with agony. He roared across a dozen systems, smashing orbital platforms and diving into asteroid fields, finally crash-landing on a broken, forgotten moon called Shayla Minor. There, in a crater of melted stone and shattered bone, the galaxy's deadliest dragon writhed in silence, alone and blinded by searing pain. He might have died, had she not come. Lyri, a human girl no older than 7, barefoot and curious, wandered the outskirts of the old lunar colony where her scavenger family had made shelter. She heard the beast's groans from the cliffs above and climbed with nothing but a flashlight and a cracked voice recorder in her pocket. Her tiny form stood dwarfed by the collapsed titan of flesh and flame before her. But she didn't flinch. She saw the shimmer of wet blood beneath his snout, the strange spike protruding, black and pulsing. As the dragon groaned, steam rising from his throat, Lyri stepped forward and whispered, "You've got a really bad splinter." Jurak didn't move. His breathing was uneven, tremors rippling down his neck like distant quakes. One of his golden eyes blinked open, cloudy with pain, and settled on her. She reached up with small hands, stood on her toes, and grasped the base of the thorn. Her fingers slipped once, then again. But the third time, she gritted her teeth and pulled. The thorn snapped free. Jurak didn't scream. He exhaled, a deep guttural sound that sent dust and moon debris rolling like waves, his entire body deflating with raw, stunned relief. Lyri stumbled backward, the thorn clutched like a trophy in her hand. And the dragon, conqueror of systems, destroyer of fleets, lifted his massive head toward the sky and let out a breath that shook the stars. When the tremor faded and the sky returned to stillness, Lyri stood frozen, hair wind-whipped and arms scratched from the fall. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but awe. Before her, the wounded titan lowered his head again, so slowly and deliberately that even the dust dared not rise. His eyes, now clearer, locked onto hers, not with hunger, but something stranger. He could have killed her with a breath. Yet he leaned forward, snout lowered to the ground, and exhaled a breath so warm it felt like the inside of a hearth fire. Lyri stepped forward again and patted his nose. "You're welcome," she said simply. Jurak blinked once, then again, and then did something no living creature had ever witnessed. He folded his wings, bowed his head, and tucked the girl into the curve of his clawed forelimb, shielding her from the cold. It was not submission, it was not ownership, it was choice. Up above, orbiting silently, Empire satellites captured the impossible image. The apex dragon beast curled around a small human girl like a hound beside a campfire. Panic exploded through command channels. Orders flew. Analysis failed. The idea that Jurak, unleashed devastation incarnate, had bonded with a human child was not just inconceivable, it was heresy. The Empire had designed him to be rage with wings. Now he had affection. They activated emergency protocols, scrambling fleets, preparing war chants, launching containment dreadnoughts with enough firepower to burn the entire moon if needed. But when the first ship entered Shayla Minor's atmosphere, it didn't find a frightened child or a wounded animal. It found a dragon standing tall, healed, watching them with pupils thin as razors, and Lyri, sitting on his head, legs dangling, hair in knots, waving enthusiastically. The commander tried to speak, but Jurak's breath ignited the clouds around the ship in a blaze of sapphire fire, disintegrating the forward hull. He didn't roar in hatred. He roared a warning. Lyri tapped his scales and said, "That's right. I'm not done exploring yet." Jurak leapt into the sky, with the girl riding between his horns, and the Empire realized too late that the most dangerous creature in the galaxy now had a reason to fly again, and worse, someone to protect. Jurak's wings carved the upper air of Shayla Minor like blades through silk, each beat sending thunderclaps rolling across the surface and shaking the very bones of the moon. Atop his broad crown, Lyri clung tightly to a ridge of his scales, her wild hair snapping in the wind, eyes wide with childlike wonder, and the deep, quiet trust of someone who had never been given a reason to fear. They soared higher and higher until the dead moon looked small and cold below them, and the black velvet of space stretched out like an unwritten story. Jurak, the beast who once devoured battle cruisers in orbit, no longer moved with wrath. His speed was fluid, his course winding, like he was rediscovering the sky not as a battlefield, but as a playground. Lyri laughed every time he dipped into a spin or tucked his wings for a drop, and with each sound of her joy, something deep inside the dragon, something ancient and burdened, began to uncoil. His rage had not lessened, it had changed. For the first time, his power wasn't burning outward to destroy. It was circling, tightening, protecting the fragile, fierce spark sitting between his horns. They landed on a derelict satellite, once used for weather control on a long-dead colony world. Jurak perched atop the metal skeleton like a king returning to a throne he never asked for, and Lyri slid down his horn and onto the platform, giggling as her boots clanged against rusted plates. She didn't know that far below, in the fractured ruins of the Empire's communication grid, dozens of eyes were watching. Military, corporate, mercenary, all analyzing, recording, calculating. The Thorn Empress, they had started calling her. Lyri of the Flame. The girl who touched the dragon's face and lived. To them, it was an aberration, an imbalance, a glitch in the natural order of terror and control. The Empire's first claw issued a single, venom-laced decree. Bring me the girl. Bring me the beast's broken heart. And thus began the hunt. The first wave of Imperial interceptors arrived in the outer orbit of the Dazari Belt, where Jurak had taken Lyri to show her the sky bridges of ice, great glacial arches between floating moons. The ships were small, fast, insect-like, designed for sting and retreat. They surrounded the dragon in a ring of steel, locked in by grav nets and stasis fields, hoping to clip his wings before he could react. But Jurak did not flee. He let them surround him, and then he breathed. Not fire. Light. A blinding burst of white-blue energy surged from his chest, not in rage but defense, vaporizing the nearest vessel without even charring the moon below. The rest scattered. Some crashed. One detonated as its own weapons overheated, fried by the radiant pulse. And in the silence that followed, Lyri leaned forward, arms around Jurak's skull, and whispered, "That's what you do now. You protect, just like me." He rumbled in reply. Not in pride, but in agreement. Their bond was no spell, no programming, no leash. It was a promise. The Empire could tolerate monsters. They could control rage, command fear, and repurpose pain into obedience. What they couldn't tolerate, what they dreaded, was the sight of a miracle they hadn't forged in a lab. The reports came in faster than they could suppress them. A girl with tangled hair and second-hand boots. A dragon older than their records, flying not for war, but for her. Together, they were moving through the galaxy like wildfire, free, loud, unleashed. Entire planets halted their networks to watch the grainy footage of Jurak hovering beside a cliff village on Balinor 3, while Lyri waved to children and fixed broken pipes. She shared stories and warm food, and once gave away her only blanket because a refugee boy said he was cold. Jurak waited outside the walls, still as a mountain, eyes tracking every movement like a sentinel carved of godfire. The villagers lit lanterns that night in the shape of thorns and stars, but not all were so odd. A faction of rogue imperial elites, those loyal not to law but to power, devised a new strategy. They wouldn't strike the beast, they'd trick the child. They seeded the next colony with false refugees. Actors. Children trained to cry on cue, mothers who could fake tremors of fear. Lyri, heart open as always, descended without hesitation when the distress signal reached them. She didn't see the snare until it snapped. Electronets flung from hidden towers, cryobolts fired from inside buildings. Lyri screamed, not for herself, but for him. And Jurak came like the end of all time. He dropped from the sky with a fury that split tectonic plates, his claws raking through walls, his flames searing without mercy. The traps meant for containment were turned to slag in seconds. The false children screamed, not for effect, but from the truth of what they had awakened. Jurak didn't kill them. He didn't need to. He simply stood over Lyri as she rose from the net, dust-covered but unharmed, and let the sound of his growl silence the galaxy. Later, as they soared through space once more, stars streaking past them, Lyri pressed her hand to his scales and whispered, "They don't understand. You're not a weapon. You're my friend." Jurak didn't answer. He only flew faster, as if the stars themselves had to be reminded whose sky this truly was. Word of Lyri and Jurak's impossible alliance swept through the galaxy like plasma through an open hull. Some believed it was myth, an exaggerated tale spun by outer rim smugglers and broken satellites. Others feared it was truth, and that fear spread faster than facts ever could. On trade moons and derelict stations, graffiti of a girl with fire in her hands and a dragon at her back began appearing, etched in soot, paint, even laser scorches. The Empire issued official denials, of course, but no one listened anymore. Jurak and Lyri, meanwhile, had no interest in politics. Their path was instinctive, wild, full of wonder and flame. They danced through gravity wells, visited lost libraries on forgotten asteroids, and watched supernovae bloom in silence from the back of drifting war hulks. Lyri collected broken things, discarded toys, shattered drones, burnt-out lanterns, and tried to fix each one in her spare time. Jurak watched her with a strange reverence, as if repairing a broken flashlight was more sacred than any act of vengeance he had ever committed. But peace never lasted long. The Empire's retaliation came not in force, but in calculation. They created a black field, a synthetic storm stretching across a solar cluster, built from collapsing stars and neural interference, a trap designed not to kill Jurak, but to separate him from Lyri. It tore open just as they flew over the moons of Eneth Prime. One moment they soared together, the next, Lyri was gone, snatched by a spatial fold, her scream cut short as she vanished behind dimensional static. Jurak stopped mid-flight, wings locking, flame erupting from his throat as rage consumed his vision. She was gone, and then, he moved. He didn't roar. He didn't destroy aimlessly. He flew into the black field. Every defense mechanism designed to repel him, every magnetic snare, every folding pocket warped to disorient him. It all failed. Jurak punched through reality itself with will alone, tearing the sky in half to find her. Inside the artificial storm, Lyri floated in a containment sphere, unconscious, drifting in electric fog. The Empire's scientists watched from orbit, smug and silent, believing their experiment complete. They were wrong. Jurak didn't touch the sphere. He sang to it. A low, seismic hum, more vibration than sound, ancient, raw, full of memory and purpose. The frequency shattered the energy lattice around her like glass under stress. Lyri fell into his waiting claws. She woke coughing, eyes dazed, and murmured, "You found me." Jurak pressed his forehead to hers, flame licking harmlessly around her shoulders. And then he burned the trap from existence, turning the skyfield into a scar that would never heal. After the fall of the Empire's trap, something shifted. Not in Jurak, not in Lyri, but in the galaxy itself. People began to choose sides, not by force or allegiance, but by belief. Those who had once trembled under the Empire's rule now dared to imagine a different kind of protector. Not a blade or a fleet, but a child who made a monster weep, and a beast who would unmake heaven to find her. The stars, once cold, began to whisper. The Empire responded with escalation. They activated Project Etherian, an ancient contingency locked beneath the oceans of Thraxis 9, a creature designed to counter Jurak. Engineered with mirrored genes grown in silence, its name was Virak. Where Jurak breathed fire, Virak breathed cold. Where Jurak moved with fury, Virak moved with calculation. And where Jurak had chosen, Virak obeyed. They met in orbit over the broken ring world of Solven. Lyri stood between them. The Empire broadcast threats, ultimatums, data feeds designed to terrify the systems watching. "Withdraw," they said. "Surrender the beast, or the child dies." But Jurak didn't flinch. He descended beside Lyri, wings wide, flame cracking in his throat. Virak waited, unblinking, staring at the girl like a problem to be solved. Lyri walked forward, her hands raised, and spoke into the silence. "You were made to kill him," she said to Virak. "But he wasn't made. He chose. Can you?" For a moment, the battlefield held its breath. Virak blinked, and then the Empire fired. Beams lit the sky, orbit cannons roared, plasma screamed through the void. Jurak wrapped his wings around Lyri like a shroud of fury and flame, shielding her from the first assault. He pushed off, claws tearing into metal, launching himself at the weapons firing below. Varek stood still, for a breath, for a blink, then turned. Not toward Jurak, toward the Empire, and howled. Not a roar, not a command, a refusal. Together, Jurak and Varek tore the fleet apart, not as enemies but as creatures finally freed from purpose. When the smoke cleared, Lyri walked between them, her shadow cast by twin giants, one of fire, one of frost, and the stars watched as she reached up, took Jurak's claw and whispered, "We choose our story, not them." Jurak didn't speak, he only knelt. The galaxy did not know how to name her anymore. Lyri the Thorn became too small, Flame Empress too dramatic, and Beast Whisperer too hollow. She was something new, something old reborn through the innocence of choice. Wherever she walked, power kneeled, not in surrender, but in recognition. The child who had once removed a thorn now led 2 dragons, one forged in fire, the other in ice, not with orders but with belief. Jurak flew at her left, his wings like burning sails, his breath warm enough to ignite the edges of solar winds. Varek flew at her right, silent and precise, cloaked in cold mist and cybernetic calculation, still learning what it meant to defy his origin. Between them, Lyri sat upon the head of a reforged carrier ship, now repurposed as her floating sanctuary, a home filled with growing plants, half-repaired machines, and children rescued from Empire experiments. She spent her days teaching them how to build things with their hands and how to speak with kindness in their voice. In the evenings, she read to the dragons, one chapter at a time, and neither beast ever interrupted. But the Empire did not die quietly. What remained of its fractured core went underground, into the blood veins of corrupted planets and forgotten war vaults. From the depths of the hollow moons of Karthus, they unearthed the Soul Engine, a weapon not of war, but of undoing. Designed by the old Empire long before the current reign, the Soul Engine could unthread gravity, erase time within regions of space, and sever memory from the flesh. Their plan was simple, not to kill the girl, not to defeat the dragons, but to erase the moment they ever met. If they could remove that single moment, that one act of mercy on Shayla Minor, then Jurak would still be pain-crazed and violent. Lyri would never become legend. The galaxy would never have dared hope. The Soul Engine required a singularity core, which they primed from the heart of a dead star. Once active, it would burn through space-time with precision, unweaving reality until the story of the Thorn was gone. Lyri felt it before it began. She woke in the middle of the night with a headache so sharp she dropped her book mid-sentence. Jurak stirred instantly, his senses locking onto the tremor. Varek stood at the window, his breath frosting the air as his eyes widened with realization. "They're going to steal your beginning," Varek said quietly. Jurak didn't speak. Lyri nodded. "Then we go to the start." The race to Shayla Minor was not a battle. It was a countdown. The Empire had already ignited the core of the Soul Engine, and its pulse was unraveling backwards, consuming the past 1 second at a time. In the sky above the moon, where the Thorn had once been pulled, stars were flickering out, not dying, but being forgotten. Mountains reshaped themselves. Footprints vanished. The crater where Jurak had landed grew shallower with every second. In a few more moments, the beast would never have crashed. The girl would never have climbed. The bond would never be born. Jurak flew faster than he had ever dared, his scales blistering from the friction of atmosphere tearing against time. Varek shot ahead, his form crystallizing into light as he pushed against the void distortion, creating a temporary shell that slowed the collapse. Behind them, Lyri held onto Jurak's neck, her face pale with focus, whispering to herself not spells, not commands, reminders. "I found you, you were in pain, I helped you, you stayed." Each word fought against erasure. The Empire's final generals watched from the edge of the breach, confident that causality would end this myth without bloodshed. What they hadn't calculated was that Jurak was not bound by the physics of normal beasts. He had lived before gravity had a name. And what they never understood about Lyri was that she was not fragile because she was young. She was unwritten, a story still being told, and stories resist being undone. They reached the moon's surface just as the final echo of the past began to fold in on itself. Lyri jumped from Jurak's neck. Time peeled around her. She landed on the very same patch of rock where she had once stood barefoot. It was whole again, thornless, clean, like her first step had never happened. But she reached into her belt pouch, where she always carried one thing, and pulled out the thorn. The same one. Black, pulsing, dead. Time stuttered. She placed it gently on the ground. The moment reignited. Jurak, just beginning to roar in pain from the past, remembered impossibly and roared not with rage but with clarity. The past locked into place. The collapse shattered. The Sol engine pulsed once, then recoiled like a beast scalded by its own hunger. Its casing cracked. Its purpose failed. Above, Virek dropped into a glide and landed beside Jurak. Lyri dusted off her knees, rose to her full, small height, and looked up at the terrified Empire command squad in their trembling station. "You tried to steal my moment," she said, "but it's ours. You can't take it back." Jurak breathed a single line of flame across the sky. Not to kill, but to write. A burning message that all who watched could read, in every language the stars had ever known. You cannot undo what was made with love. After the Sol engine imploded in its own paradox, silence swept across the Empire's remaining systems like a funeral wind. The generals vanished. The codes that once governed their ships corrupted into blank strings. Whole fleets powered down, not from sabotage, but from irrelevance. What use was force against a truth too powerful to be unmade? The moment the Empire failed to erase a bond forged in pain and healed by a child's touch, the galaxy realized, some stories live outside the reach of control. Lyri stood atop the moon she had once wandered alone, her hand resting on Jurak's snout, eyes soft with exhaustion and clarity. Virek stood behind them, his breath clouding the morning mist, no longer a weapon but something new, something choosing. The people watching from orbit, free-worlders, scavenger kings, refugees, ancient monks, did not cheer. They bowed. Not out of fear, but reverence for what had just happened. Lyri turned to Jurak, her voice a whisper. "They're watching now." Jurak lowered his head, and when he breathed, it was not fire, it was light. A soft glow of memory that spilled into the clouds and danced across the hulls of distant ships. With that single breath, he didn't destroy. He shared. And every being who witnessed it felt the echo of a child removing a thorn and a beast who remembered her forever. That day, the stars did not move. They waited. Years passed, but the story never faded. Not in songs or circuits, not in code or stone. In every port, a statue stood, not of Jurak alone, not of Lyri enthroned, but of a little girl on a dragon's head, barefoot, smiling, reaching toward the sky. No war followed. No empire replaced the fallen one. Peace didn't come because of fear, it came because belief had been rewritten. Jurak grew slower, his wings heavier with time, but he still flew each dusk, letting Lyri feel the wind across forgotten worlds. Virek learned to laugh, a strange sound like ice cracking into water, and he followed them always, quieter than his brother, but no less loyal. Lyri grew too, though she never stopped wearing her old belt, the thorn tucked safe inside a glass bead, close to her heart. She never became a queen, never wore robes or ruled stars. She simply helped, hands in broken machines, words in wounded ears, fire behind those who were too tired to fight. One evening, long after sunset painted the sky gold, Lyri sat between Jurak's wings, watching Virek chase comets like a silent guardian. She pulled out her book, the same one from so long ago, and opened to the last page. It was blank. She smiled. Then she dipped her fingers in Jurak's flame and began to write, and far above the stars blinked once, softly, slowly, like they too were listening.
Enjoy the video? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more exciting content. Thank you for your support.